Hi everyone. If we were in person, I would be wearing my witch's hat today. I like to stay with the cycle of the community calendar, especially in this course. I think it highlights a lot of the characteristics of rituals and rites that we've been discussing in this course generally. And I remember one time at this period of the year, I got on the bus in my witch outfit, and the bus driver was dressed as Odin. So it was a surreal moment and fantastic. So I want us to talk about Halloween, and this has been highlighted under COVID for me. So last night I actually had some children come to the door. So it was a very happy occasion, I think, for all of us, as it seemed to mark a little bit of a return to normality. I wasn't sure if we were going to have kids coming to the door, so I was very happy to see them. And it had been a bit dystopian with the pandemic. You almost never see children. So interesting to see also the way return to ritual is marking us moving, hopefully, out of this terrible time of the pandemic. So this is always the $1,000 question when we're in class together. So I'm just going to pose it for you to think about, which is Halloween a religious holiday? And I think, as with most rituals, and this is completely natural, if you're sitting around thinking too much about rituals, they're probably not living within your culture. So rituals typically are things we just do without thinking. So very few Canadians, I think, if you said to them, you might try this as an experiment, is Halloween a religious ritual or holiday? I think you'd be surprised. I think a lot of people would say no, but it turns out it in fact is part of the liturgical calendar. So there's all sorts of conflicting narratives about how Halloween developed specifically in the North American context, and I won't go into that too much. But there is no doubt that it falls at the time it does because it's linked to the Catholic and larger Christian practice of All Souls Day, which falls on November 1st, 2nd. So we see it across the Christian world, the practice of something resembling Halloween. Because this is a holiday associated with the souls of the dead and the welfare of the souls of the dead, in many majority Catholic countries, this is a time for grave visitation, which is a typical practice for Christians and Jews to visit graves of their deceased family members. So often there'll be a cleaning of the graves, taking of offerings, flowers, etc., the saying of prayers, saying of requiem masses for the dead, and so on. So we can see here the illumination of the candles in a Catholic graveyard. So here we have an image taken from the Mexican Days of the Dead, and I think a number of you will know about this practice. It falls at the same time as Halloween, and it's interesting to note this emphasis on ghouls and goblins and ghosts and so on. And so again, there is a common understanding that on the evening before All Souls Day, somehow in the Celtic tradition, the idea that the veil between this world and the next world is thinner, and the souls of the dead are out amongst us. So we can see many people dress as ghosts in Canada. They don't necessarily have any understanding of that connection, but there's no doubt that that was the original idea behind the fact that so many people dress as ghosts and goblins and so on. Oh, it's too good. I had a bunch of children about this age come to the door, and they were to see them all dressed up is just so fantastic. So costuming, we've talked about this extensively in this course, the importance of clothing. And so again, this is something we just do, we don't think about it, but it bears mentioning why are costumes such a vital central part of Halloween. And I had a chat with an old friend of mine on the phone last night, and she said, I only give candy if they're wearing costumes. They have to show some kind of effort. So definitely costumes are part of why they get the treat. They're showing us their costumes, and we give them the treat. And I think it's very interesting. We can see a range of costumes here. Increasingly, they're dressed as superheroes from various movies. One of the little girls last night got quite incensed I got the superhero wrong. And so we can see with costumes, it's a form, we've talked about this last lecture, of self-expression, creativity, and so on. Now, obviously, when children are this small, it's probably their parent and very likely their mother who has actually often handmade the costume. And so it's important to see that Halloween's also an expression of aesthetics and creativity. And I've noticed increasingly when I walk around the neighborhood, people are putting out these elaborate displays on their lawns. So people always had pumpkins out, jack-o'-lanterns out, but I'm noticing now people put gravestones and like hands coming out of the ground and so on. So it's getting very ghoulish and very theatrical. So this is all, I would argue, part of a kind of way that just in normal life we express our creativity and our sense of aesthetics, and in this case our sense of the scary and the spooky. And in the Canadian case, Halloween falls at the time of the death of the year, so there is that feeling of nature going into kind of hibernation in that cycle. So there is a kind of an eerie feeling, I would say, and so these costumes and decorations express that feeling of the end of the year and the coming of winter. Halloween candy, does it get better? So I was really hoping I would have a few more children because otherwise I end up eating it. It's a well-known fact that the adults end up eating the food. But it's important also to look at this, that it's remarkable in the North American case that you go up to a stranger's door and, well, they're not always strangers, sometimes they're your neighbors and you know them, but oftentimes you don't know them. When I was a kid, that was part of the fun of it, was going to someone's house that you didn't know them and you got to look in their house. So you go up to this person's door and they give you food. And so I think this is very important, and we've talked about this in the course, of how rituals hold societies together and they link them together through practice. And so this idea, like if we looked at a West Coast practice of potlatch, that idea of sharing. So Halloween, at least in the North American case, has that element within it of where we're sharing our goods and we're forming relationship in doing that and expressing, you know, generosity and care for our neighbors and so on. And I think we also can look at it in the sense of the way it has changed. So there's been a movement in some cases towards, instead of going door to door, doing a more curated version of this where you go to the mall and do it. And I think Etzioni would be absolutely appalled by this. This is really turning it into, especially to take it into the mall, into another consumer space. So it also doesn't highlight that aspect of where you're meeting people you don't know and getting to know your neighbors and so on. So again, I think to see that change tells us something about, do we mistrust our neighbors more than we used to if we have to take children to the mall and control that process so tightly. So again, I was very happy to see the children out on the street last night. So Halloween is not just for children, and it's always interesting to me. I've had a number of occasions where someone will say something like Christmas is just for children. And this is an interesting process that's been happening where, as I talk about it in the lecture, that that idea of changing these rituals and holidays to make them completely child-centered, that was never the case historically. These holidays would be for everybody. And that's still the case with Halloween. If the liquor store has anything to go by, there's always, well, at least before the pandemic, lots of students there getting ready for their Halloween parties. And so, as I mentioned in the lecture, the Halloween party would sit within tension management holidays. You can usually measure that by the amount of drinking in the Canadian case. So the idea of it being celebratory and a lot of kind of revelry and so on. And costumes, again, are a very important part of this. And again, I don't think we kind of look at this seriously, but I find it fascinating to watch how people dress up, because I think it often says something about them, who they choose, if it's a person, why they chose that person, and so on. And if the costume's elaborate enough, sometimes you can't even recognize the person. So the idea that somehow you're anonymous, and so you can act in a way perhaps a little bit out of character for that short period of time. So we can see that tension management holidays are a kind of energy valve that allows people to let off steam, because the fact is it can be very difficult to live as an adult. You know, there's a lot of role playing, you have to follow the rules and so on. And so the idea that these holidays allow us to let down our hair a little bit, enjoy ourselves. So that is also a very important part of tension management, that these holidays are meant to be fun, they're meant to be celebratory, and having fun with other people.